Good afternoon. Thank you, Supervisor Coonerty. My name is Carolyn Burke, and I'm the Senior Civil Engineer in Environmental Planning. I'm here with Kent Edler, Assistant Director of Public Works, to speak with you about a post-fire threat that many may not have heard of before, but can be life-threatening, which is debris flows. If we could go on to the next, thank you. A debris flow occurs when high-intensity rainfall saturates loose soil, rock, and other debris, such as fallen trees, high up in the mountains, creating a moving mass that travels downslope. The left image is a diagram of what this looks like from a bird's eye view. This mass gets larger as it travels downslope, with the mud rock slurry picking up cars, houses, people, anything in its path. As the mass gets larger, it also gets faster and can reach speeds upwards of 30 miles an hour. The huge mass does not stop when it reaches the bottom of the slope, but instead flattens out, spreading and depositing debris and mud in all directions. Due to the speed of the mass, the impacted area can be miles from the starting point of a debris flow. The right image on this slide is of the town of Montecito in Santa Barbara County, and shows the mud and debris deposited by a debris flow that occurred after the Thomas Fire in 2018. You can see the burned hills in the background that produced the debris flow, with mud, rocks, and debris still carving channels over a mile away. Next slide, please. Fire increases both the likelihood and severity of debris flows in several ways. First, wildfires burn trees, leaf litter, and other organic matter, which leaves a waxy residue on soils and makes them effectively water repellent. This means rainfall doesn't percolate into the ground. Instead, all the water is delivered directly downslope, resulting in a larger amount of water reaching mountain drainages all at one time. What is collected in those mountain drainages is also influenced by wildfire. As you can see, burned slopes devoid of roots and organic matter whose structure and moisture would typically hold the surface soils together begin to erode even under dry conditions. This material, along with fallen trees, collects in small drainages and swales throughout the mountains, as you can see in these photos. Then the rain hits, and when it comes to debris flows, the most dangerous type of rain event is one that's short but intense. This leads to large volumes of water being delivered downslope almost instantaneously. When such a rain event hits post-fire, larger volumes of water coming off water-repellent slopes quickly saturate the larger amounts of loose soil, rock, and debris in drainages and swales, creating a semi-liquid mass that travels downslope as a debris flow. Next slide, please. Efforts to determine the probability and locations of potential debris flows began months ago with dispatch of the CAL FIRE Watershed Emergency Response Team, also referred to as the WERT, comprised of personnel from California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection and California Geological Survey. The WERT conducted a rapid evaluation of post-fire debris flow hazards and their potential impacts to life safety and property. Their assessment included both field reconnaissance and computer modeling to arrive at a preliminary estimate of where debris flow likelihood has been increased, as well as identification of residential and infrastructure targets at risk of being impacted by debris flows. The left image is a map developed by the WERT that shows their estimates of increased debris flow probability for each drainage segment in the burn area. As you can see, the highest probabilities are in the western burn areas, which correlates with higher burn severity. This should not be confused with the areas of highest life safety risk, which is defined by both the increased probability of debris flows, coupled with the potential for a debris flow to hit existing homes. A note of caution for those trying to interpret this data: one issue identified early on by both WERT and county staff was that WERT burn severity estimates were likely lower than field conditions, and this was due to the fact that their estimates were based on aerial surveys, which showed green tree where the understory had actually been severely burned. This means that the probabilities shown on these maps should be assumed to be higher than what's listed here. It should also be noted that the WERT mapping is preliminary and doesn't include analysis of smaller drainages for values at risk. This mapping has been refined by local geologic staff for evacuation planning purposes. The illustration on the right shows watershed basins in the Boulder Creek area, included in the WERT report due to historic evidence of debris flow activity in the form of existing, quote, alluvial fans, or areas where debris has been deposited at the base of the drainage in the past. This is only one example of a scenario that is repeated throughout the North Coast, Davenport, and other areas in the San Lorenzo Valley, located within or downslope of the burn area. Next slide, please. The importance of identification of debris flow risk areas and early evacuation by residents was made clear during the devastating debris flow that hit the community of Montecito in Santa Barbara County on January 9th, 2018. The photo here is of the recovery effort and the aftermath of that event. Like Santa Cruz County, Santa Barbara County was also reeling from the devastation of the Thomas Fire, which ravaged 280,000 acres, including the hills above Montecito. Similarly, a WERT report was also prepared for the areas downslope of the burn zone, which identified the increased debris flow risk for the community of Montecito. The county worked quickly to establish evacuation maps and coordinate with federal and state personnel to monitor weather forecasts, and for the first time in Santa Barbara County history, an evacuation warning was issued for a storm event. The evacuation warning was issued more than 24 hours ahead of the anticipated storm, giving residents ample time to get out of harm's way. Unfortunately, only an estimated 28% of residents in the evacuation area heeded the warning before the debris flow hit on January 9th, 2018 at 3:45 a.m., while most residents were sleeping in their beds. The debris flow began in the mountains above Montecito and ran all the way to the Pacific Ocean. 425 structures were destroyed, totaling $450 million in damages. Highway 1 was buried under feet of mud, slurry, and debris that rescuing personnel described as quicksand. 21 lives were lost and 2 are still missing and presumed dead. In the face of such devastating loss, one can only ask how this could have been avoided. County staff have been in contact with Santa Barbara County officials to learn how we can educate our constituents to be prepared and escape such a disaster. Next slide, please. What Santa Cruz County staff learned from their counterparts in Santa Barbara is that early, consistent public messaging regarding the nature and unique risks related to debris flows, as well as clear direction regarding evacuations, are key to saving lives. In Santa Barbara, many people downslope of the burn area were on flat land and simply did not realize they were in danger from the threat of debris flows, so they did not take evacuation warnings seriously. Debris flows can run out far beyond the mountains in which they are generated, so it's important that residents are informed and know if they are within a hazardous area so they can monitor for evacuation warnings. Also, because debris flows can activate so quickly, the public cannot wait until after the rain starts falling to evacuate. People need to evacuate early. And remember, if you hear a debris flow coming, it's too late. Finally, an important point made by Santa Barbara officials was that residents did not consider debris flows as immediate a threat as wildfire, and hence did not heed evacuation orders. Post-debris flow surveys showed that 75% of residents evacuated for the Thomas Fire, while only 28% evacuated for the debris flow threat. Conversely, only 2 lives were lost due to the fire, while the debris flow claimed 23 lives. In summary, it's clear that in order to protect the lives of residents, we must make every effort to inform and prepare those in the debris flow hazard areas for early evacuation during the winter months. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Kent Edler, who will discuss more about how to be informed about this unique hazard.
Thank you, Carolyn. So given how damaging and deadly debris flows can be, we want people to be informed about a few things. First, debris flows move fast, up to 30 miles per hour. So by the time you hear or see one, it's too late. Second, you can't fight a debris flow like a fire. It's a completely different beast. Things like sandbags and K-rail will just become part of the debris if we get a large debris flow. From the pictures that Carolyn showed, it's easy to understand how these types of things can get easily overwhelmed. Third, the most prudent thing for people to do is evacuate. And fourth, keep yourself informed. Sign up for emergency alerts, watch the news, weather forecasts, check the evacuation map on the county website, and talk to neighbors and friends about evacuation orders and warnings. Next slide, please. So who's at risk? People living downslope of the burn area have an increased risk, especially if your structure is in or near a drainage channel or below a burn slope. Also, debris flows fan out at the bottom of a drainage when the land flattens out, so wide areas out from the mouth of drainages are at risk as well. What we saw from the Montecito fire is that the debris flows actually ran out about 2 miles below the burn area, so they can extend out extremely long distances. So even if you're out of the burn area and downslope, we just want to get that point across that you're not out of harm's way. Next slide, please. So this is an image of the debris flow evacuation zone map. The county geologic team worked with consultants as well as geologists from the U.S. Geological Survey, California Geologic Survey, and CAL FIRE to assess hazards and risks. The sheriff's office and the local fire agencies took that information and developed these evacuation zones. The dark blue areas on the map are areas that are most likely to be evacuated during intense rainfall, and it's important for people to know your zone and monitor this map. Next slide. When the geologic team evaluated risks, they focused on homes that are at risk of debris flows and mapped them. The entire burn area was not mapped. For instance, if there was not a home, the area wasn't mapped. Their effort was really focused on mapping for evacuation planning. If people have moved trailers into the burn zone, they may not be captured by the evacuation zone if we are not aware of them. So we really want to point out that any home or residence downslope of a burned area should be assumed as having an elevated risk. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Deputy Chris Clark, who will talk about being prepared.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Chris Clark. I'm a Chief Deputy here at the Sheriff's Office. And so what I thought I'd do is in combination with Chief Ian Larkin with CAL FIRE is to give you some information with regards to our plan to keep you as safe as possible in the event that a debris flow were to happen or conditions exist that would cause a debris flow. So to start, I thought what I'd do is just kind of give you an idea of how do we formulate our plan? Like how does that, with regards to evacuation planning and when it comes to making a decision about whether to ask you to leave your home, like how do we do that? And so in essence, we're relying on and been working with the county and county experts to identify conditions that would give us, some concern to cause us to have to worry about whether or not you would be at risk. And so, how do we? Where's our information coming from? It's coming from the county hydrologist, county geologists, and the National Weather Service. And so that's how we're getting our information. I'm going to go into thresholds here in a minute and kind of what goes into evacuation warnings as opposed to an evacuation order. But essentially, we're gathering this information from county experts. And then secondly, as you heard Kent mention, messaging. So, making sure that you're staying apprised to and registering for Code Red. So that it's a resource that Santa Cruz Regional 911 has that you can register for, and you can receive alerts via Code Red on your phone. The other is Reverse 911. And so that's something, if you have a landline, that you would receive a notification from our dispatch center over your landline. But also, I just want to stress the importance of staying up to date and staying current with social media, the news, the National Weather Service, and looking at different forecasts for weather as they're approaching. And then importantly also is that, so if you've repopulated an area, the county has a process, that with planning for you to go back into areas that have been affected by the fire. But if you're back there in an area where potentially we don't know about, you could be at risk. And so I'm going to go into a couple things here with regards to how are you going to know if you're in an area that could be at risk. Next slide. So our evacuation orders, warnings and orders. So with this, really our plan is built around a couple of huge pieces. One is notification. So you're gonna, Chief Ian Larkin is gonna talk about the Zone Haven map and kind of know your zone. And you're gonna hear that repeatedly, know your zone. That was a theme of the CZU lightning fire when it came to evacuation. So it's important in knowing your zone and where you are within those hazard areas to determine whether or not this information is going to apply to you. So if you are in one of those areas, how does that work? So for one, our CERT team, our Community Emergency Response Team, it's a group of folks, volunteers. They're going to go door to door starting as early as next week. So our EOC has put together this plan of sending these folks into those hazard areas that are identified on the Zone Haven map. And so they're going to go door to door. So if you live in one of those areas, beginning as early as next week, you could have a knock at the door, and there would be a person that's gonna let you know that, hey, you're in an area that is potentially at risk for a debris flow. And they're going to give you a brochure, and on that brochure is some stuff to help keep you prepared. A lot of it, we're talking about today, but it's going to be captured on that brochure, and different things to keep in mind as we get towards potentially an event that would trigger an evacuation warning. So notification. So again, that CERT team going door to door. And then secondly, the door-to-door notification by our deputies, just like what happened during the fire. So how does that look? So essentially, and here's kind of the crux of it. If potentially the National Weather Service and other county experts advise us that we're potentially looking at a 60% chance of rain, where the rainfall meets or exceeds 0.3 inches in 15 minutes or upwards of 0.7 inches in an hour. If the rainfall is expected to meet or exceed that, 48 hours prior to the rain hitting the ground, we're going to issue an evacuation warning. And really what that means is that you should get ready. You should start preparing, getting things ready to go. Because if that prediction so in 24 hours from that point, or 24 hours preceding when the rain hits the ground, if that prediction stays the same, again, meeting that threshold of a 60% chance of 0.3 inches in 15 minutes or 0.7 inches in an hour, 24 hours before the rain hits the ground with that threshold, we're going to issue an evacuation order. That should give everyone enough time. It should do a couple things. One is it's going to give us enough time for deputies to go door to door. That's the second huge piece of our plan, is making sure that deputies are going out into these areas and knocking on doors and letting people know that an evacuation order has happened. That's going to happen simultaneously with the notices that are going to go out via Code Red or the reverse 911s. But 24 hours preceding the rain, deputies are going to go door to door, and they're going to knock on the door just like they did during the fire, and they're going to let you know that this rain event is coming, and that we've enacted an evacuation order, and you're being asked to leave. And so that I couldn't stress how important it is to heed those evacuation orders. As you've heard from Ms. Burke, Ms. Edler, and Mr. Edler, that you can't get out of the way. And so if you've waited until the rain, a sudden burst of rain, or the rain is really intense, it could be too late. And so we want to keep you as absolutely safe as possible. So again, just to reiterate, just the time frames there, and so making sure that you're paying attention to social media, you're paying attention to the National Weather Service, you've registered for Code Red, and that you're staying abreast of everything with regards to weather that could be coming. And now I'll turn it over to Chief Larkin, who will talk about the Zone Haven map.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Chris. So as it was identified earlier, the map you see displayed in this slide by Mr. Edler, we had worked as part of the evacuation planning process with all the fire agencies that have jurisdictions that are affected, as well as the Sheriff's Department, to develop in conjunction with all the other professionals in the county, with our geologist and Public Works and all the other agencies that are involved, to come up with these debris flow zones that are associated with our evacuation planning. As you can see, there are some different colors that are associated in the map that is displayed. And what I want to just preface is, as part of this evacuation and planning, we identified the different areas that are within the fire perimeter or in proximity to that fire perimeter that could be considered a risk hazard associated with the post-fire analysis. The light blue areas that you see are areas that are primarily zones that were evacuated during the fire that have an assumption that post-fire has some type of risk associated with that area, be it that there are other hazards associated with it other than what we consider a debris flow hazard. But not to say that there aren't other hazards associated in that area. The dark blue areas of or the zones which we're referring to are areas that are considered to have a high potential for debris flow hazard associated with that geographical area. This hazard could be specific to debris flow, or it may be directly affected or related to that debris flow that may move through that geographical area, such as the road systems for access and egress to the area within that zone. I do want to point out and reemphasize, it's very important, and I can't stress it enough, the importance to make sure that you're registered with Code Red. That's the county's reverse 911 system that will alert you in the event that there's an evacuation order or warning that comes with the rain that is going to come this winter. So please make sure that you register all your phones and your mobile devices, regardless of what your service provider is. And it's especially important also to download the Code Red app to your mobile device, and that can be found at any of the app store based on your cellular provider or type of phone you have, whether it's an Android or an Apple product. And one of the things I do want to talk a little bit about, if we can go to the next slide, please. We really are pushing the campaign of a Know Your Zone. So as we move through this process, there's an application that we're utilizing now called Zone Haven. And the map you're looking at in the previous slide will show those areas that have high risk potential. So it's really important to know that zone. And the way you can find your zone, your specific evacuation zone, if you're in one of those highlighted dark blue areas, is if you go to the community.zonehaven.com, and once again, that's community.zonehaven.com. That link will take you to the evacuation, the public-facing side of that evacuation platform. It's pretty easy to use. We try to make it as user-friendly as possible. You can simply, in the search bar that's available to you, type in your address, and that will take you to the zone that you would be associated with. And when you click on that zone, it'll actually bring up the zone number and any information that's associated with that zone. For example, if you happen to be in one of those zones that is highlighted, that's in an advisory status right now, and it would show that information in there. How will you get evacuation information? It's really important, as I emphasized, and so did Chief Deputy Clark. It's important that you register for Code Red. That's the system that's going to send out that notification via reverse 911. And I know it's troublesome, especially if the power's out. We know that some landlines through AT&T and other providers only have a certain amount of battery backup in the remote areas. So it's going to be really important to register for that application as well. I know cell service is kind of spotty at times, and we'll get into some other options here in just a second. But in order to go sign up for Code Red, if you go to scr911.org, that's scr911.org, and at the top of their webpage, you'll see a red banner, and it'll say sign up for reverse 911 notifications, Code Red. That's the link you would follow to go ahead and sign up and register all your devices that you have, both all your landlines as well as your mobile devices on that web page. And then you can go to your app store and download that application onto your phone. It's really important to have that also that application on your phone and your phone registered, because it will give you alerts based on your geographical location if you're in the county or an area where Code Red is utilized. You can also get a battery operated weather radio that can receive WIA alerts, and the WIA is the wireless emergency alert system. And that will be another way for some of those remote areas that we may be able to get information to you on an evacuation status. And then once again, you can also go to the Zone Haven site, and that'll help you confirm what zones have been evacuated or what the status of the zones are. In the Zone Haven application, when it is determined that we are going to elevate an evacuation to a warning or an order, for example, 48 hours in advance, if we're going to issue a warning, that zone will become yellow in color. So it'll change from blue to yellow. And then if it goes to an order, it will change to red within that 24-hour period. So those are the key indicators of those, what the statuses of those zones are. And then as Chief Deputy Clark said, it's going to be really important for people to keep in touch with social media, Twitter, Facebook, and all the other sites that would have information that can be shared amongst the public. And then it's really important to make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that anything that, pre-pack items, just as you would like during fire season, we really stress the ready, set, go. A very similar concept here is make sure the items that you really feel you need, you're going to need to have when you evacuate. Make sure everyone in your family knows what that plan is, and try to practice that plan if possible, because time is of the essence. There's a key component that we're doing here. Early notification is going to be key in these types of events. They're a little bit different than what a fire event would bring us, where we may not have the same planning time that we have with the rain events as we will come this winter. So it's really important to make sure everybody practices that plan, knows what it is, and then make sure that you include a common meeting place, just in case members of your family are separated for some reason, or that you're in different locations when the evacuation order is activated. And then make sure that you know your evacuation routes in advance. That includes making sure that you potentially have an alternate route. We know that some of the areas that are affected are one-way roads in and out and don't have alternate routes. So it's going to be very important that you take the evacuation warning and order true to its meaning, and we want to get you out of there before the event occurs. As it was stated earlier, if you hear a debris flow, it's too late. These are a very, very dynamic situation that occurs with little to no warning when they do let loose and start to create that debris flow. And then as part of your plan, make sure you communicate with your neighbors and let them know where you're at, so that we have true accountability for you and can make sure that you're accounted for in the event that there is an evacuation. And then as part of your plan, be sure you know where you're going to seek shelter, whether that is going to be staying with a friend or a family member during the evacuation period, or seeking a hotel voucher or something of that nature, or going to one of the county's designated shelters that would be established during this event. And with that, I will turn it back to Chief Deputy Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Larkin. So what I thought I'd do is just touch quickly on having a sheltering plan and really what that means. So, definitely in terms of creating your plan, like where are you going to go? So if you get this evacuation warning, have an idea in mind even before this warning occurs. You can start that planning as early as now. Like where am I going to go? Am I going to go to a hotel? Am I going to go stay with a family member? Am I going to go stay with a friend? And then keeping in mind, COVID related concerns and how that might affect, your plan. And then county sites, and you'll hear more about that. You'll hear more about that shortly. Next slide. So, Chief Larkin mentioned it. So routes. So there's, in a town hall we had last night, there was some conversation about routes and kind of where to go. So to start, there's not going to be any hard road closures. We want people to be able to get out. We know, as Chief Larkin mentioned, that there's very limited ways in and out of a lot of these areas. And so what we don't want to do is create a clog on the roadways, which then slows everybody down and slows the whole process of getting people out of the area. And so that's why, our plan is built on that notification, on creating a window of time to be able to allow us to get in there and do notifications to you if you're in those areas, and then you to be able to get out of the area. And so there's not going to be any hard road closures to start. If an event were to happen, or there were to be other conditions that existed that prevented access, then those closures could happen. But then specifically to the point of if the roads were to change, if there's a prolonged rain event that causes some minor disruption in the roadway, we're gonna be monitoring that. We're gonna be working very closely with Public Works. Public Works has done a tremendous job in assessing the roadways and making sure that the swales and the culverts and everything are clear. But nonetheless, if rain does hit, that's something we are absolutely actively monitoring, because we want to get you out of harm's way. And so that's something that's definitely we're going to be thinking about. But nonetheless, that window of time, that 24-hour evacuation order window should allow you time to be able to get out of the way in whatever area of the county that you're in. Again, just to reiterate the importance of Code Red and really the importance of staying up to date on what's happening. I'd encourage you, as you go to as Chief Larkin mentioned, there are areas of the county that we know have limited service. They have limited cell service, internet, power, and those sorts of things. But please, keep in mind that, definitely stay up to speed on this sort of stuff. You go to the store, check the weather. You go to an area that has cell service. Take a look at, what's expected 7 days from now. And really looking, long term and keeping up to speed on the changing nature of weather, because we all know it's unpredictable. As you heard Chief Larkin mention, we want you to evacuate. We want you to be able to leave, because as we've said, a number of times, that if you wait, it's too late. And not only is could it be too late to get you out of the way of a debris flow, but if you decide to stay in an area, and I want to touch on, and I want to kind of emphasize this, is that us in public safety, fire, and us here at the Sheriff's Office, we want to be able to rescue you. We want to be able to help you. But if you chose to stay in an area and it's affected by debris flow, you could be looking at a period of time where it's going to take a while for us to potentially come and help you. And that's not coming from a place of that we don't want to. That's coming from a place of we won't be able to if a situation is just such that it prevents our access to getting to you. And that could be an ambulance, that could be a number of things. So just because you think you're not living in an area near a drainage or near a creek, and you're thinking I'm on high ground, like maybe I'm not necessarily as affected. Well, that could be true, but these plans were drawn with the thought of access to you in mind. And so our ability to be able to get in there and help you, whether that be an ambulance if you had a medical issue or something else, could be extremely hampered. And then, again, don't wait to evacuate. Let people know where you're going. If you are going to evacuate an area, let a family member know. And then, there's a resource through the Red Cross if you evacuate safe and well. You'll see that at the end of this presentation with regards to letting people know and letting the Red Cross know where you are. Because obviously, as these evacuation orders happen, we get calls, from concerned family members, concerned family that you may have. Hey, did my loved one, did they make it out? Did they leave? And so that's something to think about as you're planning to leave your home. And in terms of your house, make sure you secure everything. Security. So for us, obviously, it's notification in terms of the evacuation warnings and orders, and then working with CAL FIRE with regards to a rescue situation if that were to occur. But then also security. So, and on the security side, just like we did anti-looting patrols and things like that during the fire, we have a plan in place for that also. So, but with that in mind, if you're planning to evacuate, make sure that you're taking your valuables, you're securing your outbuildings, securing your home, just taking those sorts of precautions to make sure that that your property stays as safe as possible. And then lastly, just that if you've decided to repopulate an area, there is a process in place through the county to make sure that the area that you're going to is safe for you to go back to. And so, again, that's just in an effort to keep you as absolutely safe as possible, which is what we want as we go into this winter. Thank you. And I'll turn it over. Sorry, I'll turn it over to Matt Machado.
All right, thank you, Chris. My name is Matt Machado. I'm the Public Works Director for Santa Cruz County. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide restates the risks we have discussed and already shared. The most important item really is to heed the evacuation order before the storm hits. Other key points include sign up and register for Code Red, be aware of where you live, know your zone, and know if you live downslope of the burn area, and watch the weather. We're watching it, but it's important that you watch it as well. In summary, many variables, much risk, and the stakes are very high, so don't take this lightly. Today we covered the topics of what a debris flow is, how to be informed, how to be prepared, and how to know the risks. Next slide, please. This last slide is a list of good resources. I'd recommend checking these out. I also recommend visiting the county website. If you go to the county's main page, at the very top of it, there's a label called Santa Cruz County Fire Recovery. If you click on that, it's a great resource. There's press releases, there's maps, there's data, there's great information about debris flows. And if it doesn't answer your question, one of the most important buttons is ask the recovery team. You can ask us, we will answer you. We want to hear from you and we want you to hear from us. So visit the county website. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Melody and we will field questions.
Are we allowed to just talk to ask questions?
Melody, will you monitor our questions? No, what we'll do is we'll go through the chat and then we'll call on people with their hands raised. Melody, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to unclick my mute. Just want to remind folks, we're going to ask you to ask general questions and not those specific to your parcel. If you have specific parcel questions, ask the fire recovery team is probably a better place for that. If you're on the computer, please either raise your hand or type your question in the chat. If you raise your hand, I'll get to the raise hand folks. And if you type your question in the chat, I'll get to the chat. So I'll go back and forth between the two. If you're on the phone, obviously you can't see the screen. So again, you can email a question to Elisa Benson, ELISSA.BENSON@santacruzcounty.us, and she can put it in the chat for you. And remember, most of you are muted, so you might have to unmute, just like I forgot to do a minute ago. Just remember to unmute. And of course, be respectful. So I'm just going to take a quick look and see we have a raised hand from Julie Jennings. So I'm going to start there.
Okay, thank you very much. I live in Boulder Creek near the golf course. And I'm sorry I came in a bit late. So I thought I heard something and I just want to verify if this is true. Just like PG&E is kind of like notifying us that there's a windstorm or there's things coming down and they might shut off the electricity. Did I hear correctly that we might be asked to evacuate before it starts raining hard or anything like that?
Chris, you want to walk through the notification process?
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer that question, yes, and that's because, as you've heard from Carolyn and Kent and on all of us here, that once it starts raining, if it's an event that we're concerned about, it could be too late. And so too late for you to get out or too late for us to get in there and let you know what's going on. So our plan is built on that pre-notification, both with the community emergency response team, and we're doing that as early as next week. We're also going to test the messaging through our dispatch center through Code Red. So we're going to start that next week also, making sure that that's going out the way that we want it. And then in terms of the evacuation warnings and orders, so the warning is built on a 48-hour window of a weather event that meets a threshold of rain that's been identified by our experts here in the county and the National Weather Service. So if we foresee a weather event that meets or exceeds that threshold of rain, which our experts have identified as potentially causing a debris flow, we'll issue a warning. And so that's your moment to get ready and start executing your plan. And then if that prediction of that rain meeting that threshold, if that continues, then 24 hours before the rain hits the ground, if it meets that amount of rain, we're going to call for an evacuation order, which again allows you time to get out and then allows others to get out so that the roadways don't get clogged, and then allows us a chance to get in and go door to door, just like our community emergency response team would have done, prior. That allows us to be able to get in there and knock on doors and let people know that this weather event's approaching and that they need to leave. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, can I just follow up? So when we had to evacuate for the fire, it was an evacuation order. Because of that, insurance then recognized it as an evacuation and approved additional living expenses if you happen to have home insurance. I saw something that you were saying that, no guarantee on that, but if CAL FIRES is evacuating an area, I would assume insurance then recognizes that just like they did with the fire. Do you know that? Is that correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as up to speed on that. I don't know if anybody else as far as the presenters have any more specific information with regards to insurance. I can't speak to that with any real authority, but Matt or Melody?
Our advice is always to check with your individual insurance policy provider to determine what are the parameters around which they would support you in these conditions, because policies vary widely. So we always advise people to check. For a lot of folks, in many cases, it has to be a declared disaster in order for the insurance portion to kick in for additional housing. So that's something that you definitely want to check, because a debris flow evacuation may not be a declared disaster. And Matt, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add there. So the fire disaster, that one has stopped in the sense of the disaster number. So any new disaster will require a new disaster number. And when we talk about a disaster number, we're talking about a state and federal declaration. Clearly, we'll make a local proclamation of disaster, but for many of the funding elements to kick in, it requires a state and a federal disaster declaration. And so that'll just depend upon the event size. And so we'll have to watch that closely. And just to reiterate Melody's first note and comment, check with your insurance company in terms of what triggers that coverage.
I'm going to move now to a couple other people who have their hands raised. There's one that's called Cultivation Team. That's the name that I'm seeing.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey there. So I am curious. I'm not necessarily asking a question about my parcel, more so that I am in a very particular place on this map where I am in zone FEL-E001. So I'm not necessarily in any shade of blue on my property, but the road, that SCZ-E028, and everything around it is in blue. So I'm just wondering, as well as the people that I live with, for instance, in that situation where we're not in any shade of blue, will there be passes to, to get by the blocks, to get up to the mountain, to get to like our driveway, to get to our house? Because I'm like right at the little tiny part of the map where it's just I'm in the clear, but my road and all of my access is not. So are there going to be passes for people in those situations, or?
Ian, I don't know if you want to take that, or I can, one of the.
Yeah. There's probably a question I could probably take offline, but we've taken caution to try to capture any of the roads. That's why some of the zones are larger, to take into consideration any egress or access into those zones that could be cut off due to the debris flow. So as it was mentioned earlier, these debris flows can affect our infrastructure, which also includes our road system. So we've taken caution to include those areas so that we don't create islands where people are trapped in those islands where road systems may be affected. And I would be more than happy to try to answer your question more specifically offline. I'll put my email address in the chat function if you want to email me, and maybe we can have a more in-depth conversation.
Great. So, but there will be, I'm just curious, will there be any such thing as passes?
So I could touch on that. So it's going to be dependent on the area affected, right? So like to start, obviously, the area is going to be open to allow people to get out of the way. If an event were to happen, it could be localized. This is, we're planning for an event that we don't necessarily know exactly where it might happen, just that it might happen. And so with that, if it were to be localized to a specific area, there'd be, and then again, so passes is a great idea. It's something we had thought about during the fire. It's just going to really be dependent upon the safety and of the roadway, and really is there debris that's blocking the road that wouldn't allow you to even get in there to begin with. So it's really going to be dependent upon what happens. Yeah, if you need access to your property and you're not in an area that's in danger, we would work through that to get you access.
And then we have one more person with their hand raised, and that's Gina. And then I'm going to move to the chat questions. And Gina, you just need to unmute yourself. Gina, are you there? All right, I'm not hearing from Gina, so I'm going to take a look at the chat and see what we have there. And if Gina comes back on the line, we'll get to her. So the first question is about how the county chose its consequences in terms of risk. And the question indicates that many assets are unknown nor mapped by the county, and property owners have multiple reasons to visit their land beside the land being vacant. So if uninhabited lands are not assessed for risk, the map can lead to areas not being evacuated when in fact they should be. So does someone want to speak to that?
I'll start it off, and then happy to turn it to Carolyn if she wants to chime in on the geologic side of it. We're a race against time right now. Winter's upon us. The fires are recent, and it takes a lot of time to ground truth, to gather this data, to map it. And so we had to prioritize. And so we prioritize health and safety and looking at these structures, especially those that are lived in and still there. So that was a feature of just the time constraints that we were under. Carolyn, do you want to add to that any?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I absolutely agree with you. Just the proximity of the end of the fire and the beginning of the winter season We focused on ensuring that we were able to ensure life safety risk is minimized as our highest priority. And then, the evacuation areas were also determined really thoughtfully, trying to be able to make sure that people weren't cut off as well by access roads being inundated. And then finally, we are conducting these town halls and education events to help inform the public so that they can make safe choices this winter. So for sure, we would hope that everybody would, if you're downslope of a burn area and you have steep slopes or you're in kind of a drainage channel, please do avoid working in and or around those areas during rain events. And like we've been reinforcing, just being aware of the weather and not taking those chances. So that's why we're doing these outreach events, is hopefully so that people can become more informed about these particular situations. Yeah, so that's all I would add to that. Thank you, Matt.
And then there's a question, will the sheriff's office block off our streets and man them to keep potential looters out during each evacuation?
Yeah, so, and I mentioned this once before, to start, we're going to have, well, for one, we're going to upstaff by a large margin, both in preparation for and then following a potential debris flow. It's going to be a little bit of a wait and see. Obviously, we're going to have a ton of staff in the valley. To start, we've identified about 43 deputies that we're going to need in the valley as we approach and then make notifications to people who live there. And then we're going to continue to keep a lot of staff up there for that purpose. So yes, there is the security of people's property is an absolute piece of our plan, just like it was during the fire.
There's a question regarding our coordination with PG&E when they do power shutoffs in particular. Given that many people don't have backup power sources to receive alerts, is there any coordination we're doing with PG&E?
I'll take a run at that, and Law and Fire could chime in as well. And so, our message this afternoon is really about early forecasting and getting the word out. Much of the word out is door to door. And so we're not completely reliant on the power situation. We're not coordinating directly with PG&E. We're informed by PG&E, and they'll be informed by us. So there will be information going both directions. But a lot of our messaging, which includes door to door, the code red, which if you have your cell phone isn't as dependent on the power supply immediately. And that also leads to that self-monitoring of the weather forecast. We are advising weather radios, battery operated or hand cranked radios, so that you can monitor the situation as well. But the advanced notice, watching that forecast is really well where we are putting our energy, because we want to get the word out early before we get into the middle of an event when the power does go off. And so advanced noticing is what we're focused on. I don't know if Chief Larkin or Chris, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, in reference to PG&E, I can, during the wintertime months, we obviously know that PG&E's infrastructure can be affected by falling trees or branches, or even in the event of a debris flow, their infrastructure can be affected as well as, other important infrastructure. So those will come, those alerts will come as part of, PG&E's normal notification to the public. We probably won't have an advanced notice of any of those outages unless it's a planned outage that can be messaged out through the different systems that we have. But I think it's going to be important to just keep it abreast of PG&E's website on what their infrastructure needs are. Obviously, if there's any area that's affected by that will obviously be encompassed within our emergency, and we'll work with PG&E to try to get that infrastructure back in place as soon as possible.
Okay, the next question is about Spanish availability for information. Is the county doing bi or multilingual outreach? I don't know if Jason Hoppin is on the call. Maybe he can respond to that.
So I can touch on that, Melody. So we have had news outlets like Telemundo and such that have reached out to us for different information. But in addition to that, the notifications that our CERT team is going to be going out into the field, as I mentioned, early next week, those brochures and those resource pamphlets will be available both in English and Spanish.
All right, there's a question, will Davenport get evacuated at the same rate as Swanton? Above Davenport is yellow versus above Swanton is red. Will that make a difference in how each is called to evacuate? Or will it be a blanket evacuation for all of the North Coast blue areas at the same time?
So,
yeah. Oh, sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that, yeah, if you look at that Zone Haven map and you find yourself in an area that's shaded for evacuation, we're going to have a team of deputies that is going to be in that area. The timing, will be dependent upon, how many homes they, it's going to be, there's going to be obviously a sequence of them moving home to home. So, but yeah, yes, if that area is predicted to, experience a rainfall event to the degree that meets or exceeds that threshold, as I mentioned, in 24 hours before that, we would call for an evacuation of those areas. And then we would go obviously door to door to affect that.
Chris and Matt, I can add a little flavor to this as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Strudley. I'm the county hydrologist, work in the flood control division. I think that all areas will be evacuated, quote unquote, at the same rate as the commenter asked. Like the sheriff said, if we have a forecast well in advance of the storm, we have to get everyone out of harm's way, and we don't know exactly where these debris flows are going to occur. It's true that there are different areas of debris flow probability, which is the reference to the yellow versus the red color. But again, if we have a forecast for a heavy storm with intense rain rates coming into Santa Cruz County, we're gonna lead towards an evacuation of all the blue areas. If we move, on the other hand, if we move into a storm system without the benefit of that kind of forecast information, but we find ourselves in a situation where we are experiencing those rainfall rates that are really heavy, meeting or exceeding those thresholds, then we might be able to prioritize evacuation areas based on the direction and location of the storm. So if we see the storm trailing over the Swanton area as opposed to the Davenport area, for example, that might lead to a preferential evacuation of Swanton over Davenport based on the way the storm is moving. I hope that answers the question.
Are there specific concerns about next week's predicted rains?
So again, I can respond to that. We're expecting some rain today with a cold front moving in from the Gulf of Alaska. That's mostly going to taper off through the nighttime hours, expected to be dry through the weekend. We're having ongoing conversations with the National Weather Service to understand every forecast for rainfall, and we had one of those conversations this morning. At this point, it's a little far out into the forecast period to do a lot of over speculation, but the information that we have now coming from Weather Service is that the storm systems next week do not look like they're going to be problematic, but I want everyone to know that that can change, and we know that as well, which is why we're going to be communicating with the National Weather Service early next week and as we lead into every storm, so that we're not caught unaware with a forecast for really heavy rainfall. We'll know when to pull the trigger on the evacuations. But no, we're not expecting anything right now.
There's someone who's on the communityzonehaven.com site right now and is asking, what's the difference between the blue zone and the blue striped zone?
So yeah, I can field that question. So when you select a zone and you click on the zone, it will pop up a window that gives you this current status of the zone, and then it will turn it, give it hash marks to identify the exact zone that you've clicked on. So it has really no reference other than just identifying what zone you're actually viewing.
There's a question about how long can people expect to be evacuated? And Mark, I think you want to maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, just unmuting. Sorry about that. For the most part, and Chris can certainly supplement this from the sheriff's office, for the most part, the evacuation is going to taper off when we have the rainfall tapering off. So when we no longer have an expectation for rainfall rates meeting or exceeding those rainfall thresholds of 0.3 inches in a 15-minute period up to 0.7 inches in an hour or thereabouts, that's when we would probably give that information over to law and fire, and then they would presumably be lifting evacuations. But I'll let Chris talk about the specifics as well.
No, Mark pretty much hit it on the head. So that's basically, that's the conversation. So, we want to make sure we get you back home as fast as possible. We want to make sure, though, that we're doing that in a way that's safe, and that we're relying on Mark and other experts to be able to tell us that there's no more rain expected, or there's no further issue. That the last thing we'd want is to get you back home and then ultimately something happen or have to re-evacuate you.
So there's a question, well, it's a statement, but there's a sort of an inferred question about somebody indicates that their boss was thinking of having a group of AmeriCorps volunteers come to stay at our facility starting December 1st. I don't know how smart that is if it sounds like there may be frequent evacuation orders. And the person asking the question is Kat. Kat, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask a question there, or if you want to identify where your facility is.
Well, yeah, my question is basically, we're at one of the camps where I already checked the map, and we're definitely in the blue zone. We're next to Camp Campbell, and so now that I'm hearing all this, I'm just wondering how wise it is to have a group of volunteers come that would be both living and working at the facility, because I don't know even what their transportation capabilities are, because they're volunteers that then would be staying there.
I don't mind answering that. So Kat, really, I can't speak really to the operation of your business. All I can tell you is that we're monitoring the rain and we're monitoring the weather. So in terms of how many evacuations we may have to effect as we go through this, it really we just don't know. And so
it's my first time actually living or staying up in Boulder Creek. So my first experience was being there for a couple of months, having to leave for the fires, and then now this. And so I'm not even sure how much it actually rains in Boulder Creek every winter. So that's also why I'm asking.
Yeah, Mark can maybe mention a little bit about the weather pattern and with regards to kind of what this winter looks like. But absolutely, we understand the anxiety and the apprehension of being in an area that could be subject to this stuff. I would just reiterate making sure that you're up to speed as much as possible with regards to different weather resources, and then at the same time we're going to be monitoring this stuff very closely as you've heard from the team that's been speaking. So maybe I'll just turn it over to Mark maybe to explain a little.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a resident of Boulder Creek as well, and I've lived in the valley my whole life. It rains quite a bit up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Down at lower elevations, the mean annual rainfall is 25 to 30 inches, but it increases drastically the second you start rising in elevation. So you go up into Big Basin State Park and your average annual rainfall is 40 to 50, sometimes 60 inches, depending on how high you are. We get more rainfall here in Boulder Creek than we do in Ben Lomond and Felton. That's because of the elevation and the way the storm patterns typically arrive here. It is common for us to lose power every winter multiple times. And I think the expectation with the debris flows is that we may lose power more often than we typically would because there's a lot of dead trees out there. PG&E and their contractors have been doing a pretty diligent job at trying to trim away the potential for trees to fall on their lines, but it's a pretty large area to cover, and there's a lot of tree hazards out there. Again, we can't speak to your business operations nor your specific aversion to risk, but I would expect to be evacuated at least several times this winter because we simply, like Sheriff said, we do not know precisely what's going to be happening, and we don't want anyone to be caught in the way of a debris flow path. And Camp Campbell is in one of those locations that would be evacuated because of that hazard. The other issue you should probably be aware of is, if you're not familiar to the area, is that the miles of water supply line that the San Lorenzo Valley Water District owns and maintains was burned by the fire and was replaced, but it is cutting across steep topography that we anticipate being affected by debris flow. So it's also possible that water supply could be at issue if there's a large debris flow that cuts across one of those lines. So it's not just power loss and communications loss, it could be other utilities like water. So you might want to factor that into your decision-making process for Camp Campbell and your temporary employees or visitors that you were speaking about.
Well, when I looked at the map, if I was looking at the map right, it looks like the camps in that area, Camp Campbell and Camp Harmon, it looks like they're almost like right below a very wide mouth of a debris flow. And so I was wondering if that, because it looks like a triangular, like very wide debris flow coming into those areas, I was wondering if I'm interpreting the map correctly.
Yeah, so I mean, our county geologist, and Carolyn can speak to this as well, the county geologist did map those areas as a debris flow hazard area. So your interpretation of the map sounds correct, like you're interpreting it the right way. That is a potential area for a debris flow to funnel itself down towards Camp Campbell.
So,
Okay.
Kat, I'm going to move on to somebody else now, so they
Thank
have
you so much.
chance to answer a question. There's a question about the issue with Code Red, and it's not working with older phones, and wanting to know if that issue has been addressed.
So I actually saw that, I don't know if Ian, if you have any other specific information, I saw that comment in the chat, and that's something I'm going to look into. In fact, I made a note of it.
I had the same comment. I was unaware that it had an issue with the older phones. I know it does have issues with the voice over IP if you lose internet service. So, but that's something that Chris and I will both look into and try to get an answer to that question.
And then on the same issue with the Code Red, it said the instructions weren't particularly clear. And is there a way to check to make sure that people are in the system? Can people self-check that to be sure that they're in the system? And again, I think they just want you to reiterate how people are going to be notified if those means of notification aren't working.
Yeah, so that's another thing I'm going to look at. I know in my conversations with our dispatch centers, they pull lists all the time as people have registered to make sure, to kind of gather a number, so that they're understanding how many people are registering for Code Red. Specifically, how do you know if that registration has worked? We're going to do a couple things. One is that we're going to do a test of that notification system through Code Red. Our EOC is working on that with our dispatch center. And then in addition to that, like how do you know you're going to be notified again, it's through a couple different ways. One is the CERT team going door to door, as I mentioned, and then we're going to go door to door as well. So there's going to be a combination of a number of different ways for you to potentially to get information. But again, as we've said, we couldn't stress more importantly the need for folks to be up to speed on what's going on with the weather.
And someone is asking if we can explain the specific risk around the San Vicente Creek and that area in Davenport.
I can help with this question. There are some mapped potential for debris flow in the upper San Vicente Creek watershed where it was burned. And we're aware that there are communities both up in the upper parts of San Vicente in the Bonnie Doon area, as well as the lower parts near Davenport. And it is because of those communities, particularly in the lower parts of San Vicente Creek near Davenport, that are rather close to the channel itself, that's why that area is painted into a blue evacuation zone. We wouldn't want the people that are living close to the San Vicente Creek channel to be caught from a debris flow coming from high up in the watershed, which is entirely possible.
Hey, Melody, can I follow up
Sure.
on a question real quick? That question about how do I know if I'm registered for Code Red and that works? So we looked, our EOC looked into it. The phone number for you to be able to make sure that you're registered, I want to give that to you, and it's in the chat, but 866-939-0911. And that's 866-939-0911. You can give that number a call. Essentially you're calling Code Red directly to make sure that you're in the system.
Thank you, Chris. A question for those of us who have the dark blue and light blue zones dividing line going through the middle of our property. Can we get the alerts for both zones?
So I can answer that. So the map that was shown in the presentation is the map that was used to develop the debris flows and also just show the other risks areas that we had associated. In the community.zonehaven.com application, you will not see the light blue areas, only the areas that have been put into some type of advisory. So if you're not in one of the dark blue zones, you may not receive the notification, but if your zone that's associated with that, say the neighboring zone is evacuated, you would get that notification. So the only way we send those out, that would be a selected zone and it would go to the entire zone. So there is not a method to notify you unless that entire zone is selected as an evacuation zone.
If Mill Creek becomes blocked with debris, who unblocks it?
I can take a stab at this one with probably Matt's assistance or Kent. It probably depends on where on Mill Creek we're talking about. The Mill Creek crossing under Swanton Road, that's a county road, and I know that our Division of Roads has been working on that crossing in regards to impacts from the fire. But upstream, there's a variety of private property holders. I believe Big Creek Lumber owns some property up there. State Parks might own property up there, and Lockheed may as well. And there's probably other private property landowners. And in large part, if a blockage occurs on your property, it's largely your responsibility to unblock it and to address it. I don't know, Matt, do you want to supplement that with anything?
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that. So county roads, county crews will be monitoring those culvert crossings and keeping them free and clear the best we can. I think I saw a note in there about Caltrans Highway 1. They've been a part of our conversations from the beginning, and so they'll be doing the same for state highway facilities, culverts and bridges and such. The county and even Caltrans to some degree, we are trying to stage equipment in areas so that we're ready to respond to issues. But that just covers the state highways and the county roads. And so Mark's point about private property, that's a good, he was spot on.
Do you want to mention the urgency ordinance as well? That's kind of paving the way for that activity, make it easier.
Sure, that's a good note. So this past week, the Board of Supervisors adopted an urgency ordinance, which will enable us to clear those blockages adjacent roadways on private property. And the vision there is to keep the water flowing and not allowing, a major backup. We believe this will be critical and essential for the smaller debris flows. And this is good mitigation, good preparation for managing those smaller flows and smaller debris flows. And but those are particularly adjacent public rights of way, and where we have to just get off the right of way to do some clearing in an adjacent creek or channel.
All right, Matt, you jumped ahead in the questions to the culvert on Highway 1 and answered that, so I'm going to go back. If we have several weeks of intermittent light rain, will that abate the risk or severity of a debris flow?
In general, no. The only reason it might abate the risk of the severity of a debris flow is if it's far enough along in the winter season that you start having plant regrowth and root network regrowth that starts holding together the top layer of soil that tends to let go in a debris flow. So the waxy layer that Carolyn and Kent were speaking of earlier in their presentation that forms below the surface of the soil a few inches down from the fire, that doesn't start to break down until you've had at least a full season of rain and sun to work its way to break that down. If you get root networks starting to form, they can kind of peel that waxy layer apart as well. But in general, we're going to be looking at the same risk of debris flow as we move through the entire winter. So if we see those forecasts for heavy rainfall, whether it's December or whether it's March or April, it's going to be the same issue.
It's worth noting that even over the next couple of years, we will have debris flow risks. And so this is going to take some time for these mountains to repair themselves.
So there's a couple of just quick messages. One from Supervisor Coonerty advising that they'll be working with the Community Action Board and the Davenport Resources Center to get bilingual information out. And one also about that Netcom was not aware of the trouble with the older phones, and they're going to figure out what the lowest software version it can be loaded to, and we'll get that information out as well. There's a question about how will we be notified when we can go home? Chris, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So with regards to repopulation, it's going to work a lot like it did during the fire. So, the know your zone and paying attention to the Zone Haven map, but also paying attention to messages that we're putting out, both the sheriff's office as well as CAL FIRE. So we're going to be sending out a lot of information, but we definitely know that you'd want to get home as fast as possible. And so we're going to, so knowing your zone and then paying attention to the Zone Haven map and other resources is going to be key.
Is the county aware of the risk of the Davenport upper quarry potentially getting blocked and creating a flash flood issue for Davenport? Is the county going to be monitoring that upper quarry intake to make sure it stays open?
So I'll start this one. I believe the county geologist is aware of the issue with the old limestone quarry there on San Vicente Creek. The portion of Old Town Davenport is within the evacuation zone adjacent to San Vicente Creek along there. And I think one of the bigger concerns that the county geologist has is actually if the culvert under Highway 1 gets blocked, and what the flooding is going to do to that. But that area, just to note that area is included in the in the evacuation zone. But we don't have plans yet to monitor the the intake. That's actually not county property, but we can work with the landowner up there, post Semper Virens.
And there's a question about, are there any plans for the last chance community? And that is, I'm not sure specifically what you're asking. That's Kelly Meyer. If you want to unmute and be more specific about that question.
I can offer to Ms. Meyer that we are planning to install one of our new real-time rain gauges up in the vicinity of Last Chance in the northern coastal portion of Santa Cruz County. We do have really good rainfall coverage with our gauging right now, but we are aware that there are concerns up there, and we are not leaving any part of the county out of the mix, including Last Chance.
Yeah, and just to echo what Mark said, you know, from the map and the information we've gathered, you know, there's a small portion of Last Chance that was identified, but you know, for those of us that have been through that area, that know that area, just even more important, if you've gone back there and you've repopulated, I know that a lot of that area was heavily damaged by fire. You know, your road in and out was in bad shape, I know, after the fire. And so I've gone out there. I know Supervisor Coonerty's gone out there. It's a tough situation there with Last Chance, especially with the road situation. And you know, any amount of rain could cause a problem there. So which could cause access issues for us or for you to get out. So I guess, you know, for Last Chance, I really couldn't stress more that if you're back there, that you really need to pay close attention to the weather, just in a sense of giving yourself a chance to get an opportunity to get out of there. So yeah, definitely you'd want to stay as up to date as possible with the weather.
We're getting close to 1 o'clock, so there's a few questions here that I'm just going to try to get to. So what are your plans regarding debris flow? Oops, someone just moved it. In the coming years, as the big rains could come in the future.
So future winters will be very similar to this winter. You know, we possibly will update information, but the strategy would be much the same. Large debris flows are not mitigatable, and so we'll have to continue to discuss evacuation plans and continue to monitor. That's going to be the coming years for sure.
And then there's a request if you could repeat the rainfall inches per minute per hour drivers for an evacuation call, especially the 24-hour rainfall forecast. If you could just repeat that information.
Sure, it's 3/10 of an inch in 15 minutes, 5/10 of an inch in 30 minutes, or 7/10 of an inch in an hour. And again, we are strongly concerned about that very high intense rainfall rates, not a 24-hour rainfall total.
Okay, and a question, are you aware that much of the Laguna Creek watershed was not included in the preliminary debris flow map? Most of the area between Smith Grade and Ice Cream Grade was heavily burned, and there is a city water catchment facility at Smith Grade and Laguna Creek that is at risk. We have taken some water resources folks up there to see the burn firsthand.
I can respond in part to that. The water supply facilities on Laguna Creek at Smith Grade, there's an old stoneworks diversion facility there. That stonework diversion facility has been largely filled mostly with sediment for many years. So it's an ongoing kind of chronic issue at that facility that the city has been managing successfully as long as it's been occurring. And I think the city is prepared to deal with sediment coming in from debris flows at that water intake. I can't speak specifically to their contingency plans for that water supply component to their system, but they are aware of it. We also know that it was mapped as a quote unquote value at risk by the watershed emergency response team. But because there are not many residences up there, it's not one of the highest priority evacuation areas. I'm aware of a few homes in that area, but not many.
There is a request about real-time rainfall website, and Kent posted that information, as did Mark, in the chat. It's santacruz1rain.com, and so that information is in the chat. So that's
SantaCruz.OneRain.com.
Thank you, Kent. Guess I need to fix my glasses. And we talked a little bit about the trigger rainfall events. And the question is, how many times did this sort of thing happen last winter?
I can't tell you specifically how many times it happened last winter, but it is not uncommon for us to have a high intensity rainfall event like an atmospheric river arrive and deliver rainfall rates upwards of ½ an inch per hour or more. It's something we typically experience on average once or a few times every year. But then again, if you look at much more prolific rainfall years like we had in 2017, we had probably 8 or so repeated atmospheric river events that came almost on a weekly recurrence between the months of January and February. And we had intense rainfall bursts in those storms almost every single time. So I wouldn't hang your hat on an expectation of how many times you think this might occur. And that's why we, as well as you, should be watching the upcoming forecast information to understand if there is going to be that kind of rainfall occurring in any given storm.
All right. And then one last question, I think, and that is, Chris said know your zone, but it was not clear what method sheriff will use to notify when people can repopulate. I think Chris just answered this question a minute ago, but we'll have him repeat it just to be sure. So Chris, if you wouldn't mind responding to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, it's the process for, knowing whether or not you're going to be evacuated just in reverse. So you just pay attention to the Zone Haven app, and then, check that as well as social media. And we're going to be putting that information out as well as CAL FIRE on which zones are open for repopulation. So definitely keep checking Zone Haven, and then just keep checking our social media, and you'll see updates as far as that's concerned.
All right, I want to respect people's time. It's about 1:03. I want to thank everybody for attending this session. I want to remind folks that on Saturday, November 21st at 11 o'clock, we'll also be doing an in-person session on debris flow. All of the subject matter experts that were here today will be there then with their masks on. And we will also be able to divide you again by District 3 or District 5, so you can ask your specific questions that are more related to your district. Again, 11 o'clock, 701 Ocean Street parking lot. We're going to do it outside to respect COVID requirements, and we're going to hope it doesn't rain. If it doesn't rain, we'll move into the building, but we will spread you out in the interior corridors. So they'll be going up and down some stairs or elevators that will be necessary if it rains. So again, thank you all for coming. We have recorded this session. We're going to post it. The resources, as you see, are right there. Those are all posted on the website already, and we will be sure to post the presentation as well, so you have that information. Do not hesitate to ask the recovery team through that app if you have further questions. We again thank you so much for paying attention. We want to keep you safe this winter, and we appreciate your willingness to listen to this presentation. So take care, everybody, and we will be watching over you this winter.